The studio lights blazed with a heat that rivaled the tension in the room, casting sharp shadows across the polished stage as Representative Jasmine Crockett took her seat. Her posture straight, eyes blazing with determination, she had rehearsed this moment not in words, but in resolves, the culmination of months of whispers, redacted documents, and sealed files she had fought tooth and nail to access through a tangle of congressional subpoenas, backroom pressure campaigns, and whistleblower testimony. The live interview had been set up under the premise of a discussion on judicial ethics, a clever facade to avoid tip-offs and backstage sabotage. But what she carried in the manila folder nestled under her arm had nothing to do with hypothetical principles or vague oversight. As the broadcast counted down to air, the crew milled about nervously, sensing the undercurrent of something far more explosive than a policy debate. Behind the scenes, Trump's handlers had begun to buzz his word, spread that Crockett had gone off script, but it was too late. The host, caught between duty and spectacle, gave her the floor, and Jasmine, without a flicker of hesitation, leaned into the microphone and spoke with the gravity of someone about to turn the world on its head. Tonight, she began, her voice unflinching and low, "We stop pretending we don't know. And I stop protecting the powerful because they've made threats behind closed doors. The American people deserve the truth." The camera zoomed in, the audience quieted to the sound of breath alone. And the moment that would shake political America into a frenzy had begun. Jasmine's words rolled like thunder, soft at first, but building into an unrelenting storm. She recounted her journey. Subtly at first, how her inquiries into Epstein's extensive dealings had been met with stone walls and evasive memos. How the DOJ refused to honor legitimate congressional requests under flimsy executive privilege claims, and how, during one late-night oversight hearing, a staffer had slipped her an unmarked envelope that changed everything. In it were fragments, copies of visitor logs, financial transactions, flight manifests, and one unmistakable photograph, a young girl aged 17, seated on a private jet beside Donald Trump, dated 6 months before Epstein's first arrest. She hadn't spoken of it publicly, not because she doubted its authenticity, but because the moment had to be perfect, the documentation unimpeachable, and the platform undeniable. Tonight was that moment. She projected the image live on the screen behind her, casting an eerie glow across the studio. Gasps erupted from the crowd. She did not falter. "I have spent the last 8 months working with private investigators, federal whistleblowers, and victims who were threatened into silence," she said. "They are watching this broadcast. So is the man who tried to buy their silence and mine." Backstage, chaos erupted as producers received urgent messages. Phones rang. One aide to a conservative senator was seen sprinting out of the green room. On Truth Social, Trump had just begun a rage-fueled post, calling Jasmine a fraud and partisan liar. But before it could gain traction, she dropped the next bombshell: audio recordings of conversations between Epstein's former House staff and unnamed Trump aides discussing cleanup funds and emergency vacations to foreign destinations. Her legal team had vetted everything, her sources had gone underground, and the NDA threats were now powerless, she continued, revealing the names of lobbyists and fixers who facilitated hush payments to victims through shell packs. What began as a political interview had now become a televised indictment. The magnitude of the moment was seismic. Legal experts across networks scrambled to respond in real time. Within the hour, hashtags like hashtag Crockett Files, hashtag Trump Epstein Ties, and hashtag Live Takedown were trending worldwide. Crockett remained unmoved. Her evidence was not emotional, it was methodical, chronological, irrefutable. She produced scanned checks from offshore accounts matching names of no deceased Epstein affiliates, 2 organizations later absorbed by Trump-owned companies. She displayed metadata from photos showing timestamps that debunked alibis offered during past inquiries. As she unveiled each piece, the reaction wasn't just media frenzy, it was legal panic. Trump's inner circle convened an emergency meeting at Mar-a-Lago, where staffers reportedly shouted over each other in a flurry of accusations and strategizing. Jasmine, meanwhile, stayed composed. Her voice never wavered, though behind her eyes burned the memory of what she'd learned of victims too scared to speak. of investigators reassigned to bogus committees, and of the slow suffocation of truth. In favor of maintaining image, she named names, not all of them politicians. Fewer CEOs, some judges. One a former intelligence officer who'd quietly retired just before an internal investigation mysteriously closed. The camera stayed on her face as she delivered the next revelation, a decrypted email chain from 2002, involving discussions of youth logistics between Epstein and a shell company linked to a now-defunct Trump real estate project in the Virgin Islands. "This isn't gossip," she said as the host sat frozen in awe. "This is a trail of money, messages, and men who believed they'd never be held accountable." She wasn't offering theories. She was delivering an audit. Of the cover-up, live, in the aftermath of the first hour of the broadcast, Capitol Hill resembled a shaken hive. Lawmakers from both parties were pulled from dinners and fundraisers to be briefed. Democratic leadership called for an emergency ethics review committee. A few Republicans denounced the revelations, but some, especially those with previous ties to Epstein's social circles, remained conspicuously silent. Trump, cornered for the first time not by political opponents, but by a tsunami of raw evidence, spiraled. According to sources at his private estate, he had screamed at his legal team, demanding immediate lawsuits against the network, the studio, and Crockett herself. But no one could act fast enough to undo what had already been seen and heard by millions. Jasmine's dossier had already been uploaded onto a secure public ledger via blockchainer. Failsafe she had arranged in case of interference, she explained. Lawyers scrambled as journalists began demanding comment. Foreign outlets began translating the broadcast. And victims previously unheard began making contact with Crockett's team. And still, she wasn't finished. As she looked into the camera, to begin the next part of her expose, one involving a now-retired intelligence agent who brokered Epstein's data hoarding for leverage, her message was clear. This wasn't personal. It was justice delayed. And no one, not even a former president, would hide behind power anymore. As the cameras rolled into the second hour, viewers around the globe were no longer watching a political interview. They were witnessing the disintegration of an empire that had been built on illusion, intimidation, and institutional decay. Jasmine Crockett, poised yet fierce, remained undeterred by the wave of chaos that now consumed every branch of Trump's network. While Trump's legal team issued desperate cease and desist threats through faxed letters and late-night emails that were promptly leaked online, Jasmine calmly opened a small leather-bound notebook and flipped to a bookmarked page. What she read next was a verbatim transcript of a confidential deposition given years ago by an Epstein associate under immunity. One that had never been released to the public due to a conveniently timed mistrial. The voice trembled on paper, recounting scenes of underage trafficking, coded language used in party invitations, and the way Epstein's connections to Trump were not just frequent but integral to the operation. They called him the closer. The statement read, if a girl wanted out or someone got nervous, Trump was the one they'd send in to charm the situation away or apply pressure through money. The host sat in stunned silence. No producers dared interrupt. The studio crew stopped pretending to work. On Capitol Hill, staffers huddled around TV monitors, some crying, some texting furiously. Trump's surrogates tried to respond, launching a blitz of talking points, calling Jasmine a political assassin, an unhinged partisan, but nothing stuck. She wasn't speculating. She was reading directly from documents, audio transcripts. In digital forensics, the internet was on fire. Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram flooded with reaction videos, live analysis, and frame-by-frame breakdowns of every slide Jasmine presented. The screen behind her now showed a string of tax filings and transaction chains tracing unmarked donations to nonprofits that, when cross-referenced with the Epstein Foundation's remnants, revealed matching disbursement patterns. To a photo of a young woman blurred for protection, and told her story a minor who was flown to Mar-a-Lago under the promise of a modeling contract and then disappeared for 6 months. Her voice broke slightly then, but only for a moment, before she returned to the same measured tone that had already shaken the world. And then, just when viewers thought the worst had been unveiled, Jasmine delivered the most damning revelation. Yet she reached into her folder and pulled out a small USB drive, which she held up to the camera. This, she said, contains a series of encrypted files taken from a private Epstein server by a whistleblower in 2019, files that the Department of Justice was supposed to act on but instead buried under an unrelated investigation into Wall Street misconduct. She inserted the drive into a secure, isolated laptop system provided by the production Team 1 designed to prevent cyber interference, and projected the contents onto the screen. Inside was a spreadsheet, sterile and clinical, cataloging over 130 trips made by Epstein's planes, listing passengers, dates, departure points, and hotel bookings. Trump's name appeared in 27 of them, many with matching aliases that had already been verified through airline logs subpoenaed during previous probes. Besides several names were red asterisks. Jasmine explained what those meant, confirmed. "Minor on board?" The crowd gasped audibly. She scrolled down to a section labeled Client Service Notes, notes that detailed preferences, requests, and delivery instructions for VIP clients. It read like a criminal manual, using codes that had been cracked by federal agents, but never made public. Trump's pseudonym, Red King, appeared 6 times under a column labeled Repeat Access Cleared. The host, visibly shaken, whispered, "Oh my God," unaware his mic was still live. The control room panicked, fearing legal fallout. But Jasmine pressed on, showed a video clip pixelated and time-stamped of Epstein's voice in a conversation with a hidden camera operative. The audio was clear. Epstein laughed about Donald playing rough and joked about keeping receipts in case he ever stopped being useful. Jasmine paused. That was 2015, before the election, before the scandals, before the cover-ups. And yet here we are still pretending none of this matters. She turned to the audience. The silence was crushing. It wasn't a debate anymore. It was history unraveling live. As this second wave of evidence reverberated through every media ecosystem, Trump's legal team scrambled to contact sympathetic judges for injunctions. But most courts were either closed or unwilling to intervene on a broadcast protected under Congressional Shield laws and the First Amendment. Former White House staffers were cornered by press while exiting restaurants and social events. Phone records leaked showing panicked calls between Trump allies and known Epstein fixers in the days leading up to the broadcast, suggesting they had known in advance that Jasmine had acquired the files. MSNBC, CNN, BBC, even Fox all carried the story now, though Fox tried to reframe it as a partisan ambush. But the raw documentation Jasmine revealed, file paths, IP logs, witness video statements, all of it made denial a weak defense. Meanwhile, Jasmine began naming people within law enforcement and intelligence who, over the years, had either stalled investigations or redirected public interest. One name sent shockwaves through the intelligence community, a former NSA deputy director who had, in 2017, ordered the scrubbing of Epstein-related data from interagency databases under the pretense of national security threats. Crockett had obtained the classified memo through a federal source who'd since fled to Germany under whistleblower protection. She read from it directly. Target assets linked to DT must be neutralized. Delay public access. Engage with neutralizing. Media. She let the implications hang. For a moment, it wasn't just Trump's corruption that was on trial. It was the entire ecosystem that it enabled, shielded, and weaponized his power. Even members of his own party began to fracture. One junior senator from Utah tweeted mid-broadcast, "We were wrong. I was wrong. There must be accountability." The dam had broken. Jasmine showed an email chain from 2018 between Trump's personal lawyer and a now-defunct offshore bank discussing campaign insurance in the event Epstein was subpoenaed again. "It's all here," she said, lifting a binder with hundreds of cross-referenced documents. Every lie, every payoff, every time someone looked the other way. Meanwhile, the mood in Trump's inner circle had shifted from denial to full-blown panic. Mar-a-Lago was put on internal lockdown as rumors swirled of impending indictments. With Secret Service agents seen holding emergency consultations with DOJ officials, conservative donors began backing away from key PACs linked to Trump's legal fund. With one billionaire issuing a terse statement, "I will not finance the defense of crimes against children." Trump himself, holed up in his private study, was said to be yelling at TV screens, furiously drafting counterstatements and calling for loyalty from fading allies. But the silence was growing. People who once spoke on his behalf were now conspicuously unavailable. His family, too, remained quiet. Melania was nowhere to be seen. Ivanka refused to answer questions, and even Don Jr., usually fiery on social. Media had gone dark. Jasmine, meanwhile, took a breath and calmly addressed the camera one final time before the commercial break. To the victims watching this is your moment. To the officials who covered it up, your time is running out. And to those still protecting Trump under the guise of loyalty or politics, understand this. Truth doesn't care who it destroys. The lights dimmed for the first time that night, and the screen faded to black, but the world was already on fire. Calls to reopen federal cases flooded DOJ hotlines. Independent prosecutors across states began launching inquiries. Foreign governments demanded cooperation from U.S. intelligence. And Jasmine Crockett, once underestimated, now stood as the woman who dared to say what others wouldn't, and she was only halfway done.